new life could be super short. Ever since they busted
Long
up-
time ago, I grew up in a faraway land called Iowa, Des Moines, Iowa. And
Like, so sorry.
back, it's actually nice. You should check it out. I know MURS has been there.
I've been there too.
Oh, okay, there we
Made
go.
it out.
Drake, that's where Drake is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My father went to Drake University. We should do this next year in Iowa. But anyway, you know, growing up, I always like to talk about this analogy. When I was growing up, hot sauce, right? How many of y'all in here like hot sauce? Any type of hot sauce, raise your hand. When I was growing up, hot sauce and Tabasco sauce, which is a brand of hot sauce, they were synonymous with each other, right? You ask for Tabasco sauce, they might give you Red Rooster or Pete's or something like that. If you ask for hot sauce, they give you, it's like Xerox or Kleenex or something like that. And Tabasco had a huge portion of the market at that point in time. All their marketing, all their efforts was focused on the middle-aged, middle-class, white man in middle America. So what started happening very quickly was demographics started to change. And then all of a sudden, Tapatio, Cholula, Red Rooster or Pete's, which are more regional brands, Sriracha, started really marketing and understanding that certain communities, certain ethnicities like hot sauce as well, and they like to be marketed to. Now, what's happened over the years is those brands, as well as other hot sauce brands, have really taken a tremendous amount of market share away from Tabasco. And I think that the reason that this panel is so important, because we see that now happening in other industries as well. In the entertainment industry especially, now we see them getting out in front of that. Now we see a movie about Cyborg, a movie about Black Panther, a Netflix show about Luke Cage. In the comic book world, we see Miss Marvel becoming Muslim or Iceman coming out of the closet as being gay. These are things that the industry understands and tries to get in front of, and we see that now, and that's why all of us are here today to talk about these things. But what's interesting in any culture shift or any paradigm change, there is things that get left out, there's things that aren't done as well also. And today we're here to talk about the fanboy and the geekdom and geek chic or whatever you want to call that, and how that has evolved over the years. I've mentioned it a bunch to our panelists about the stereotypical version of what a fanboy is, and I always think a comic book guy from The Simpsons, right? Oftentimes, the fanboy is not the young, hip, cool dude with new Jordans on and the iPhone watch or the Apple Watch. It's kind of like the loser, if you will. But as we can see from Comic-Con, that's far from the case. There's a bunch of different types of people here being represented and being celebrated and celebrating who they are. So these are the types of things that we're going to talk about a little bit today. So I want to introduce the panel. The first, Jamie Broadnax from BlackGirlNerd. Kellvin Chavez, editor of Latino-Review. Good friend of mine and one of my favorite artists, hip-hop musician, Renaissance man, MURS. Raza Ghul's daughter, also known as Nisa, also known as Katrina Law. My man Ryan Coogler, director of Fruitvale Station, which is an amazing movie. You guys got to see that. But I got goosebumps earlier this week when I saw the trailer for Creed, his next movie that's coming out. And then we got Tyler James Williams, star of, Everybody Hates Chris. You guys remember that? Also played Noah on The Walking Dead, and we all remember the gruesome way that he went out on that show.
Not like a trooper.
And the exhibit downstairs is reminding us how gruesome that is.
Yeah. So, we're all here just to chop it up, and we're going to have time for some questions later. But first, I want to pose a few questions to a few people. I think it's interesting, Black Girl Nerds, the whole concept of that. And I was on the page a couple days ago reading your About section. And it's not just for black girls, and it's not just for nerds. It's really a place about the anomalies, right? Or the people that have been portrayed as anomalies. Like I was saying, like it's not always the middle-aged white man with the ponytail that's the fanboy. Tell me a little bit about when you first became a fangirl and then when you decided that you needed to build a website to support that.
Oh, wow. So I first started fangirling, so to speak, getting into comics. At 10 years old, I got into X-Men, the 90s animated series on Fox. Big fan. So much so, I went out and bought X-Men Adventures, which was based on the series, and was also a big Excalibur fan for you Chris Claremont fans out there. Alan Davis run. So yeah, I went ahead and evolved from comics to video games and just was a fangirl of so many different things. And also, I'm a huge TV junkie. But I noticed that there weren't any spaces on the interwebs that represented women of color and black women in particularly. And I had seen so many things evolving in nerd culture and noticing that on Scrubs, the word blurred was being used, the portmanteau term for black nerd. And also just seeing what Issa Rae has been doing with her Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl series, web series. So one night I just went on Google and typed in the term black girl nerds and nothing came up, which was ridiculous. You know, black nerd came up, girl nerds came up, but the term black girl nerds did not. And it was at that point that I just decided to place an indelible print on the web and create a blog using that term. And the website really celebrates nerd culture in so many ways. We talk about, you know, the typical comic stuff and video games. We also talk about tech-related stuff and coding and programming. But also what's really important about this space is not only do we talk about nerd and geek culture, but we also talk about what it is to be women of color and dealing with issues of social injustice and dealing with issues of racism and misogyny. So recently printed an article about Bree Newsome and the work that she did with, you know, getting up on that flagpole and bringing down that Confederate flag. And Bree Newsome is actually a friend of BGN because I ran a story on her about 3 years ago about her work in film. She's a filmmaker. So, you know, we talk about all different kinds of things. And Black Girl Nerds has evolved from not only being a website, but it's also a podcast, which airs weekly on TWIB, the acronym for This Week in Blackness.
And you rev your fans up too, right? You got some trending topics, Dim Thrones.
Dim Thrones, yes. Yes, since we have Katrina and Tyler on the panel, we live tweet Arrow and we call it Dim Bows.
Rolling bows.
And on The Walking Dead, we call it Dim Deads on Twitter. So it's a great way to just, you know, be a collective on social media and, you know, find folks that are cut from the same cloth as you. So it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Now, Katrina, sometimes when, you know, and I'm a culprit of this too, sometimes when we talk about the minority experience here in the U.S. or in the comic book industry or the entertainment industry, sometimes we only talk about it from a male perspective or a black perspective or a Latino perspective, but you're half Asian, right? And you talked about some of the challenges that you had when you first got to Hollywood to find roles that understood those nuances.
Well, I think it's interesting that we fall in, the Asian community falls into a different type of stereotype. And if I were to Google Asian girl nerds, I'm sure my Google search would be completely different than yours. So I feel like in that stereotype, when it comes to Asians, we either get cast as the massage girl, the happy ending chick, the stereotypical, like, oh, you want some fried rice? Like, you know, it's like, that would be us. So it's really hard. So for me, Lucy Liu has been a huge influence. The fact that she is now a leading woman on Elementary, and she's fought so hard to go from being kind of like the sidekick to the white chick and then moving up to her own show, that shows me the progress that Asian Americans have been making. But also, I think as like for a woman, I think, let's just take Invisible Woman. I think she's a prime example of how women have developed over the course, especially in the geek culture. When Marvel first came out with the Invisible Woman, she basically was the weakest out of the four. She's part of Fantastic Four, for anybody that wouldn't know that here. But anyway, but she was the weakest one. She only had one power. She could only turn invisible. She was constantly in distress. She was being saved by the men all the time, even though the men were holding their own. Even though she was a superhero, she was constantly needing to be saved. She was being fought over by the men. And now you look at her, and all of a sudden she's cast as a Latina girl compared to the white girl that she used to be. And all of a sudden she has more power. She got power upgrades. And now, it's not going to happen in the actual Marvel movies, but in the comics, she actually goes against her husband, speaks out against him, and says in the Civil War, I don't agree with your stance, so I'm taking a different side, and I'm actually going to stand against you. And back when she was created, that would never, ever have happened. So I feel like the progression of women in comics and geek culture is making leaps and bounds, but at the same time, you still see there is the token white girl, the token black girl, the token girl out of a cast full of men. So for me, I'm just waiting until it becomes more, it doesn't need to be 50-50, but 40, 60 would be nice, like even 80, something. Like two women can act together and get along and not have to be catty towards each other.
Right.
So I think that's our biggest struggle. Well, one of our biggest struggles. Anyway.
Well, love that. You mentioned Fantastic Four. When I started seeing the trailers for the new movie that's coming out here soon, I saw another change in the Fantastic Four. The Human Torch is now black. And not only is it black, it's Michael B. Jordan, who's the star of both of your movies, Ryan. I was talking to some people about this, and there's black representations, there's Latino representations, whether it's Falcon or War Machine or something like that, that they're always kind of like the sidekick up until this point, right? But now, like I said, in a lot of these movies that are coming out, the black man, woman, the Latino man, women are going to start playing more essential roles in that. When the trailer came out for Star Wars with John Boyega playing the Stormtrooper, there was a lot of controversy. But what some people said is it looked like 12 years of Stormtrooper, because all he was doing in the trailer was running. He was afraid. He wasn't necessarily he wasn't necessarily kicking ass, But what I liked about Fruitvale Station, what I liked about the trailer for Creed is that those are real movies. It has this grit, right? I haven't seen Creed yet. Maybe I can come over to your house and get a sneak peek, but
Me too.
it has this real grit to it, right? How do you translate that grit, that realness that so many of our realities are filled with onto the big screen in a way that if there's a young black kid or a young Latino kid sitting at home that grew up in an urban area, they're like, oh, this guy gets it.
I mean, I think a lot of that comes from, I guess in the industry they call it above the line. You know what I mean? But it comes from like who's writing the material, who's directing the material, and really who's casting the material. We talked a little bit about it, but it's certain actors that are going to bring, that are going to ground whatever they're in. You know what I mean? You just cast certain men and women, and no matter what the role is, they're going to bring that element to it that makes it real. It's funny, we just had at the Hall H panel, the Warner Brothers panel, and anybody can see that Suicide Squad trailer? Yeah, so like the best thing about that trailer was just, it starts off with Viola Davis. You know what I mean? So just off top, it's like I'm watching a real movie. I'm watching a real person. That's how powerful casting can be. And then even before that, it's not like when I sit down and make a movie, I'm like, man, I'm gonna make this as gritty as possible. I'm gonna make this like as real as possible. I'm gonna go out and make sure this speaks to young African Americans that are coming up in environments like I came up in, because that's just gonna happen naturally. You know what I mean? Because that's where I'm from. That's what kind of stuff I would want to watch. So as long as I'm being true to myself as an artist, that's gonna tend to come through. And so what I really look for is to see like more people above the line, more people of color above the line, more people with diverse experiences above the line. Because that's when I think it's really gonna start to change. You're gonna start to see that shift. And even what's crazy about comic book culture is it starts even before the movie is made. It starts in the writing room for the comic book. Right. You know what I mean? So seeing more women there. You know what I mean? More people of color there. You know what I mean? More people from different sexual orientations there. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's when we're really gonna start to see the changes.
Right. Now, Tyler, you're the youngest member of this panel, and I'm interested to know, like, you know, like I said, I'm 38, and when I was a kid, I didn't necessarily like tell everybody like, hey, I'm super into Star Wars or the X-Men. I was like, nah, I'm into hip hop. You know what I mean? Because, you know, that was the accepted role for minority young people at that time. You're a lot younger than me, actually. Did you grow up a fanboy, and what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because like I feel somewhat foreign in the conversation because with kind of my crew and how we kind of grew up, we did not distinguish ourselves as any culture. It was just a part of who we were and what we liked to watch. We never quite identified with, I guess, what is now, I guess, the term like geekdom, because it was cool as shit to us at the time, you know. We grew up, you know, when the like kind of Spider-Man trilogy came out. And it's like, you know, that's just what was on mainstream kind of media at the time. So yeah, it's a lot different. I think, you know, with my generation, you're gonna see a lot of that, but even with the next generation of, you know, what Marvel's been doing for the last 5 to 10 years, you know, like I look at my brothers and that's all they know. This is a part of life. Right. You know, this is mainstream culture now. You know, we can try to compartmentalize it all we want to, but you know, when the #1 movies of all time at this point are now, you know, when you have things grossing, you know, $550 million, and it's a part of, you know, fanboy culture. I don't know if it's just fanboy culture, if it's pop culture at this point.
Yeah, I agree. MURS, you know, when I first heard your music, it really struck me as being a more realistic representation of what the rapper behind the hip hop persona was. You know, you from LA, but you weren't rapping like super hardcore gangster shit, but you still were acknowledging like that was a part of it, a part of your life growing up. But you know, you did a Kickstarter campaign in 2012 to get your own comic book out there. How have you been able to balance, years ago, how were you able to balance these two sides? Like, hey, I'm into comic books and Star Wars, but I'm also a rapper and I'm dope as a motherfucker.
Oh man, I feel like I should pull my chain out again. I always put it in the music, and it was just always glazed over. But you know, some geeks embraced me, but I didn't look like I read comic books, so no one expected me to know, so no one would have those conversations. Like I rap with a guy named Slug from a group called Atmosphere, and And we never talked about comics, we would talk about hip hop, and then one day I went to his house and I saw the comic books, and we were able to talk about Vertigo and Preacher and Invisibles and things, and he was shocked. And then, you know, it's just not something that's brought up, and like Tyler was saying, now it's it's everywhere, it's for everybody. But originally in my neighborhood, it was just like Crips and nobody to talk to about, you know. So at first, you know, it's like, cuz you read? And I'm like, yeah, you know. But, you know, eventually, you know, growing up with them, like, they knew I could fight, and they just, you know, for better, they left me the fuck alone. They said, oh, that's weird, cuz, like, he ride the skateboard, he read the comic, let him go. Like, you know, the bigger homie, after I fought, cuz they be like, leave that little nigga alone. Like, you know, he's just doing his thing. So, and then eventually when I did get bussed into another school, because I was, you know, intelligent in a magnet program, I met other black kids that were bussed in, and then we couldn't afford comics, so we would go to a certain store in Hollywood, I'm not gonna say which one, and I would run the diversion, he would steal, you know, all the chromium covers and the image, and, you know, and that's how I was able to feed my habit. And now I buy comics every week to kind of fix my karma and shit, but, you know, being from the hood had its perks because I still have Exo Man of War Zero chromium cover, and I have all these things because, you know, the hood in us was able to go in and know how to steal everything, you know what I mean? And I was robbed as a kid because back then I didn't know Rob Liefeld couldn't write a comic book, you know what I mean? So he was robbing me, giving me, never mind, it's a whole other
Kellvin, you know, I started going to Latino-Review. A couple years ago, I started getting really into these websites and, you know, Reddit boards and stuff that I'm just like the guy that I want to know the whole movie a year before it comes out. You know what I mean? And I started stumbling upon Latino-Review over and over as the place that kind of like spoil alerts, or this is what Captain America Civil War is going to be about, or this is who Superman's going to be, or whatever. But I always was like, why the hell is this called Latino-Review? You know what I mean? Tell us about the story that you shared with me earlier about how it started.
It started because, like you were saying before when we spoke, I'm a big fan of movies. I love film. My first movie was actually Richard Donner's Superman. That was the first movie that my mother ever took me to see. And ever since then, I just love the movies. Every weekend I would ask her, and back then, it was $5 to get into a theater, and I used to ask her for $10 because, $2.50 popcorn and $2.50 soda. I was it, and I was just sitting there, and then Tim Burton's Batman came out, and I was a big fan of it. And then the whole website started coming out, and I used to always follow Ain't It Cool News and Coming Soon, and then I said, I want to do something like that. And then I went to the Barnes and Nobles, and I got the Dreamweaver for Dummies, and that's because, whoever built the website, you have to use HTML, and HTML, was, Dreamweaver was the key to build a website. And when we finished building the website, I didn't have a name yet. I wanted to call it Review something, so then my nephew and I, we were sitting around and he said, why don't you just call it Latino-Review? Because, a lot of the Latinos who are English dominant speaking, like me and him, we go to the movies, and Hollywood knows that, like, a lot of the ticket sales are from us.
Oh, it's crazy, yeah.
So he said, just call it Latino-Review. It's your Latin perspective of the movies. And you're a humongous geek, fan, nerd, whatever you are.
So when did it change from doing reviews to, like, worrying studio heads, like leaking out their whole shit a year before? When did that happen?
Well, like I was telling you earlier, there was this thing called, there still is, forums. And there was a forum called not Superhero Hype, but Spider-Man Hype had a forum that said, the first Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire was filming literally like 5 blocks away from where I live. So I just drove there, and my friend lived in that building where they were filming. And the scene was, he was running, Tobey Maguire was running after the bus, and he would say, stop the bus, stop the bus. And I took those pictures, like set pictures. So set pictures became huge. I gave them to Ain't It Cool News, I gave them to Coming Attractions, I gave them to Joe Blow, and from there on, it just blew up. So then I took advice from other sites and said, how do you keep getting, recognition and popular? And I said, you can't just do reviews for movies once a week. You have to keep updating every single time. So that's what I started doing. And then, I'm because of what I've been doing, I've met a lot of industry friends.
Right.
And they give me the tip, as long as I don't, say where it comes from. They will give you the tip. They will give you the tip. The funniest one that I had was a janitor who works at a studio, who told me that this guy was playing Freddy Krueger. And the next thing you know, the producers denied it, and then 2 weeks later, it was official.
That's crazy.
Wow.
Stuff like that. But it's been a wild ride. 15 years already doing this.
That's crazy. Well, I go there every day now, so thank you.
No.
So, there was this, at Cashmere Agency, I work with a lot of multicultural millennials. We, do branding for different brands, from Adidas to the E Channel to Warner Brothers Studios and, Paps, all these things. So we consider ourselves like the cool culture kids, right? And we were sitting around arguing about, when did geek chic come in? Like, when did fanboys become cool? When did Comic-Con become like the coolest place on earth to be? Not just a place for like the outcasts or the nerds or something like that. I want to pose this question to each of you guys. We start with you, Tyler, because you kind of said that it was always kind of the same thing. If you had to like point to like one moment or a series of moments when you think kind of this culture shift happened, what would you say would be?
When they realized it had started making money.
Exactly.
Like everything else, this industry is funded through money. When they realize and they come here and they see the number of people here. And, one thing I try to explain to people a bunch, especially with like television, is you have to understand all we're doing is selling advertising time. Once advertisers see that there's a huge audience here, that's what they're going to put their money into. And it's the same thing, with film. I think the power is, in the loyalty and in the solidarity of this, what I now call pop culture, but of this culture. I think that's when Yeah, I don't really remember. There's not a time I don't remember somebody kind of talking about Comic-Con at one point, which is weird. You know, even by the time I was at least 12, you know, I remember we had started Chris around that time, and UPN was talking about sending us down here. You know what I mean? So that's like to help promote the show. So yeah, I think once they finally caught on that there's a huge audience that's willing to spend money on their favorite products, that's when everything changed.
Right.
And that's when everything will continue to change.
Do you agree, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm a little older than Tyler, but like it's weird because you kind of like Mike, that you've been in the industry since you was a kid. You know, so it's an interesting perspective. Like, but I mean, I would say that yeah, it had to be when, you know, when obviously when the industry starts making money for other industries, that's when it becomes attractive. You know, but I mean, I would think somewhere around Spider-Man, the Spider-Man trilogy. You know, when Spider-Man was something that was so like untapped, as far as cinema had gone. You know what I mean? It wasn't like Batman, it wasn't like Superman, but it was just as popular, if not more, amongst young people. And when Sam Raimi's movies came out, and they just made crazy money. And then around that same time that Nolan like rebooted Batman. You know, this concept of a reboot, like really changing the landscape of a property. I think it was somewhere around there. You know. And it happened in music too, like Kanye became cool. You know what I mean? At a time when like it was all gangster rappers, like you couldn't just sell records. You had to like brag about how many people you shot, or how many times you've been shot, or how much dope you sold. Right. And then Ye came out and was like, man, I ain't really done none of that. You know what I'm saying? I kind of sit. You know, I'm from Chicago, but I sit in my basement and make music, and I worked at the Gap. And that, you know what I mean? And that blew up. And then all of a sudden, it was like it became cool, even in hip hop culture, to talk about kind of being a square, you know what I mean, or being in the weird things. So I think that all of those things kind of happened around the same, you know, like the early 2000s, you know, and that was when it really took off. But it's still like accelerating, to be honest. Like I was here. It's my second time at Comic-Con. I was here in 2008, and I was like a broke film student. I couldn't afford a sandwich. You know what I'm saying? It was a different experience, and just between like 2008 and now, like I come back and it's like the Cannes Film Festival here now. It was crazy. Like I didn't even really recognize it. I was telling my fiance, I'm like, man, Comic-Con is like completely different. That wasn't that long ago. Right. You know, so it's a trip.
Right. I think it's interesting because there's a lot of parallels between the evolution of geek culture, fanboy culture, and the evolution of hip hop, and obviously like the apex of geek culture is in the summer when these blockbuster movies come out. And, you know, I've been watching the trailer for a lot of these blockbuster comic book movies that are coming out either this year or next year. But I saw the trailer to NWA Straight Outta Compton, and I was like, that shit looks like a superhero movie to me. Yeah. And it looks like an origin story, right? And those guys were superheroes to me when I was growing up. So it's interesting to see those types of parallels, and I agree with you when, you know, Kanye and MURS and artists like that, and Kendrick now, who's an evolution of that, show like there's these other sides of what being young and African American or young and in the being in the hood is about.
It's weird. Like even when I was a teen, like going in my early teens, it's funny, like listening to MURS talk about it. I was the odd man out for not being able to skateboard. Like when you go back, you know, just 10 years before that, you know, black kid in the hood picks up a skateboard, you getting your ass beat. You know what I mean? It changed so fast. It took such a drastic turn. But I think we can kind of, like you were saying, I think we kind of stopped lying to each other. It's kind of what happened. And I think, you know, everybody like kind of viewing these fictional heroes as heroes and these kind of traits that they saw, and realizing it's like, it's cool. Like it's this really cool. I remember having that conversation with, you know, one of my cousins who had been in prison for a long time, and coming out and like now seeing what's happening with comic book movies. He's like, yo, if this was happening before I went in, I may not have gone in. I found this cool as shit back then, and nobody would listen to me. But like, it took such a drastic turn
comic
because
book movies keeping black people.
Yeah, like I wouldn't have to feel like a superhero on the street.
Right.
You know, I could just look at this and like, I mean, and then you see so many like perceptions of ourselves in there now.
Right.
You know, it's changing. We were talking about this on the phone the other day.
Right.
Like we're on the cusp of this door finally shattering. You know, we're not just knocking it down anymore. We're like, we're right there. But I think had we all kind of told each other the truth a little bit more, we could have changed the way society was shaped, and we're just now seeing it now late. But it's the truth. You know, this culture allows us to be free authentically.
Right.
You know, not put on this front and then make a decision that's, you know, not well-rounded because of it.
Right. Katrina, I know Arrow has some rabid fans, right?
Crazy.
Yeah.
Love you guys!
And, you know, I'm sure you do a lot of signings and deal with people on Twitter and stuff like that, going back and forth with your fans. This perception of what has typically, traditionally been the mainstream version of what this fanboy is, and what they look like in the space that they occupy in the world. Have you seen that evolve? Like, what's your take? What's a fanboy now?
Well, I think it's really interesting how it has gone from this kind of nerdy, quiet, underground, like small-pocketed version to what you said, which is now pop culture. And because the original fanboys were essentially the Star Trek people, and they were sitting there basically watching this bad animation of like whatever they were trying to get, but the story and the science behind the storytelling that they were doing was so interesting and actually related to quantum physics, and like most of it's actually come true in our society. So these are the people that were glomming onto that. And I would say that I would agree, I kind of agree with that it's the money, but Star Wars was a huge international hit when it first came out in the 70s or whenever it came out, but it didn't really inspire people to go out and make more sci-fi movies. So that was kind of like its own little thing. And I think the reason why geek culture is so chic today is because I feel like the technology has caught up and made it so easy visually for people to watch it. So it's no longer the Star Trek people going, but if you could just listen to the story and what we're saying, it's cool, because now we can just, as an audience member, go, that robot car thing looks real. And it's that easy, or that dinosaur looks amazing. And I really feel like for me the shift began with Batman Begins, because it was the first time that they took a comic book and really made it grounded and gritty and realistic, and kind of took away the fluff and like the cheesiness of it. And that was a combination between the acting style, the directing, and also the technology that went behind it. And for me, I think the ultimate thing that kind of kicked it into pop culture was a combination of Robert Downey Jr., Iron Man, and Jon Favreau, because not only all of a sudden did you have this amazing technology to back up this story that people have been watching for years, but I think it might have been the first time any of us could really have believed that this guy in an iron suit is really in a legitimate iron suit that can do all these things and make him fly. But then Robert Downey Jr. had so much personality that he just made it fun across the board. And even with Batman Begins, you kind of really had to be into Batman, and you had to kind of go into this dark place and like kind of get the growl on and like, you know, do your thing. But when it came to Iron Man, and that kind of spurred this entire Marvel thing that's happened. And this is why Comic-Con is essentially so big right now, is I really think it's the Marvel influence. But I think it was because all of a sudden the technology was great, the acting was fun, and everybody could latch onto it without having to go too deep, too dark. And yeah, I really just think it's the technology. I really do.
Well, you mentioned the technology, and there's obviously the CGI and all of that, but there's also the technology on the audience side, which is just the internet. And you know, so much of the time, Jamie, like there was probably like maybe one or two black girl nerds in a school, right? And they felt kind of ostracized or like they were alone. But all of a sudden the internet was there, and it let them find other people from around the world that were like them. What role did that play for you in like realizing that, oh, there's other young black females that are into the same stuff I'm into? Was it like an eye-opener, or did you always kind of guess that it was out there?
You know, we've always been here, and that's like one of the biggest comments and feedback that I get from folks, either on Twitter or via email or a comment on the thread on the blog, is I thought I was the only one. And no, we've always been here, but you know, the problem is we don't really see ourselves, you know, in TV shows and movies. But it's good to see that this archetype of what it is to be a nerd, and being a Black female nerd is slowly evolving in different spaces, and I hope to see more of it happening. I think Aisha Tyler is a great example of seeing women that are like gamers, that's hardcore, into gaming industry. I just started a series on the blog talking about Black women in gaming, but I think social media has been a great conduit for us to find each other, and the live tweeting helps.
You definitely tap into like the Black Twitter phenomenon, right? And if it's amazing how like all these networks are understanding that now. We're talked about like 4 years ago, there were so many complaints from like the NAACP because of all the network shows, they only had one lead that was a minority, and that was Cleveland on the Cleveland show.
Right. So yeah.
That was voiced by a white man. But now going into this coming season, there was 90 new shows in development featuring minorities as the lead characters because of the success of Scandal and How to Get Away with Murder and Empire and these.
God, I live tweet all those shows. Jesus.
So they have you to thank. Right?
Well, hey,
but it's important
good.
because those voices, like, Black people and Latino people and Asian people, we use social media differently. We socialize differently. We talk about different things at the barbershop or the hair salon differently. And it's represented there. And people like you now are helping, I don't want to say organize, right? But like being a catalyst for that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, we've always been on the cusp of technology, and people of color and Black people, we've always been early adopters at everything in pop culture. So what's happening with Black Twitter and what's happening with live tweeting shows and just getting a lot of attention, it's not surprising at all to see that. So it's really exciting when you're live tweeting a show and you've got like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. following you or the Sleepy Hollow account following you, which is weird because Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., I don't like that show. I don't watch that show. I don't live tweet it. But they still follow me on Twitter. I don't understand what's going on with that one. But yeah, I'm waiting for the Arrow folks to follow on Twitter.
Do you feel?
And The Walking Dead.
I'll put in a good word.
Kellvin, your site is called Latino-Review. Do you feel like a special responsibility because you made the decision so long ago to call your site that? Do you feel like a special responsibility to the Latino fanboy community?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want it to be that in the beginning, but it just ended up happening. Like when I bumped into Jon Favreau, actually here for the first Iron Man. He actually said, "You're an important site," because he had read a script review that we did for his film, that he portrayed a Puerto Rican wrong. So they went back and they changed it just because of what we had said about it.
Awesome.
So that was, pretty cool.
That's dope.
But
MURS.
I do like the fact that there is a lot of Latinos in comic book movies. You have Benicio, you have Zoe, who has 3 franchises.
Absolutely.
She has Guardians of the Galaxy, Star Trek, and Avatar. And
It doesn't get much bigger than that.
Her and I went to I didn't go to high school with her, but we were in the same high school. And Corona, Queens, that's where we were all from. And it's cool to see her get that.
Yeah, it's awesome, and we're seeing it everywhere. MURS, I want you to answer this question quickly because then I'm going to take some questions from the crowd. But, I feel like rappers and producers and the fans, the hardcore fans of hip-hop have always been nerds, right? Have always been like, because we were looking for something else in the lyricism. We talked about that. It wasn't simple R&B lyrics all of a sudden. It was like very intricate. Do you think that, I hear Wu-Tang Clan and I'm like, these guys are nerds. They, Kung Fu flicks and like their references that they're talking about, those are fanboy references a lot. Also, there's some 5%er and some other gangster shit in there, but a lot of it is like fanboy stuff.
Yeah, I think what Tyler was saying, it was just about being honest because honestly, if you have time to make music and put words together, you're not really selling a lot of crack, and you're not, you know what I mean? You are the intelligent one. Like Nas wasn't shooting those people, he was watching it, and if you watch the Time is Illmatic documentary, you'll see his father had him in the house reading, and that's why he's alive to talk about this stuff, and he's able to articulate it in a way that's eloquent and poetic because he was exposed to a lot of culture. And a lot of rappers do, read, and they don't want to admit it, but if you're able to, articulate and deliver your message, you have to be a reader, and I think that the secret's out now. And initially a lot of people, they dumb it down so that they can have a more street appeal. And my contemporaries were like, there's no black people, there's no niggas at your show. And I'm like, I see that when I go home, but those niggas are gonna fight and shoot each other. And I'm able to be 20 years in this because I decided to be me, and the authenticity connects with people.
Right.
And then the white kids that they made fun of me for rapping for buy T-shirts, and then they grow up to become engineers, and they can still support my career while the people you're rapping for go to jail and can't pay their child support. But now all of a sudden what I do is, like he's saying, like Kanye, now it's cool,
Right.
all of a sudden. But when I started, it'd be like, oh, you do that weirdo stuff. But I was like, yeah, man, I don't want y'all coming to my shows. That's cool. I'll see you when I get on.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting because there is ways to maintain the authenticity and still speak to the fanboy culture. I wanted to shout out my guy Aaron Magruder, who's in the house, who's done it with Boondocks and Black Jesus. And we talked a lot too in preparation for this panel. We have a couple more minutes left. I wanted to open it up for questions. Right here.
Jane.
You want to stand up?
Oh, sorry. Jane, I was wondering, I recently got into this kind of back and forth about the black women specifically in this culture and how we're seeing Black Panther, we're seeing Cyborg, we're seeing all these black male characters that are kind of coming up, and you're not really seeing the same for black women necessarily. And also kind of when you bring that up, a lot of people are like, well, but we got Black Panther, y'all gonna get y'all's eventually. What have you experienced on the pushback on that when you try and specifically center black women in the conversation?
Man, I noticed a lot of misogyny happening in the blurred community, the BlackGirlNerd community, when the whole situation with Ava DuVernay being announced, as possibly being courted by Marvel for directing Black Panther. And, folks were just going crazy over it. Well, she's not going to represent Black Panther well, and, she's taking away T'Challa's masculinity. And I'm just like, are you really serious? She can definitely direct a film and show a great, strong black male character. The movie was called Selma. She did that already, okay? But I think that people need to really understand that there's so many black female characters out there that us asking for those roles should come naturally. The fact that I'm so happy that Vixen is getting an animated series. That is awesome. I really hope, fingers crossed, that we see Misty Knight in that Iron Fist series on Netflix. So I think that it's slowly but surely it's happening, but I would love to see it happen enough. I'm here with Regine Sawyer. She's the founder and creator of Women in Comics, New York City Collective. I'm telling you, since I've been here, I have not known so many women of color that are writing, that are illustrating comics, that are distributing. She owns her own company. She's publishing comics. She's sending out the checks to writers and folks that are actually doing the job. So we're out here. It's just we definitely want to see more representation, and I think guys should give us a little break when we ask for it, since you guys are doing good already. Y'all, you've got your Cyborg movie coming, you got your Black Panther movie coming. Let us get our Storm movie. Can we do that? So
That's what's up.
yeah.
Any more questions? Right here.
This is for the panel. We talked a little bit about Michael B. Jordan playing Human Torch earlier. I just want to get everyone's take on the idea of recasting traditionally white superheroes as people of color, because everyone's been getting along, but as someone on the internet who's proposed casting non-white people as white characters, I've gotten a lot of pushback. I know Jamie gets a lot of pushback on the internet. Do you think that's a good course to go down? Because I know that recently, not recently, but a while ago, Michelle Rodriguez was all stop stealing white people's superheroes.
Right.
So what's the panel's take on taking these traditionally white characters and casting people of color in those roles?
Well, I love it. I think it's awesome. Gives us a chance to have panels like these, but
I think it's kind of ironic you know, because just listening. So you said X-Men got you into it, right?
Yes.
So like, what's crazy about X-Men is X-Men was based on Martin Luther King and Malcolm X.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like literally, like the writers was like, man, that's an interesting conflict. What it's like to be somebody who's not accepted in society, and when one leader wants to be peaceful and one leader not so much. And they made that. I mean, that's in many ways that's kind of a recasting. You know what I mean? I look at a lot of big stories that we all know, and a lot of them like got a lot of cultural reappropriation and recasting in their DNA. So I personally don't see any problem with it. You know, especially on our side where a lot of times we'll get like non-fictional characters recasted in movies. You know what I mean? So I think that a non-fictional human being is not really that big a deal, man. So I hope to see more of it personally.
Well, it's interesting because it seems to be okay in some portions of the fanboy community if it happens in the comic books first. Like there was so many rumors about which Spider-Man was going to be the next Spider-Man. Like, was it going to be the black Spider-Man or the white Spider-Man? You know, but if it happens in the movies first, or on TV first, Kellvin, do you think that makes it different?
Not really. I mean, it was flashback when they cast. I think the big thing what happened was when they cast Michael Clark Duncan as Kingpin. Everybody went fucking apeshit. They were like, "What the hell? No! It's supposed to be white." But I think the person who deserves the role is, the best actor for the role gets it. That's it. Yeah. Whether it be Asian, Latin, whatever race. That's just my opinion.
I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, and they race bend in comics all the time. So I don't know why when things get, transcending over to the film screen, that all of a sudden it's a big deal. So.
Yeah, I also just think that a lot of these comics, when they were first written, were in the 50s and 60s, and to be perfectly honest, the go-to was the white guy, and that's just that. So when people like Stan Lee started writing their black characters, they were being progressive, and but at the same time, they did call them names like Black Panther. Like, why couldn't you just be
double
superhero?
down?
Yeah.
Double down. Make it clear.
I gotta, you know what I mean? Or like Luke Cage, like he had to go to jail. Like, why can't you have a black character that didn't go to jail?
Yeah.
It's, you know what I mean? Like, why did it have to be that? So, but I know Marvel went back and they rebooted it. And I think, what was it called? Like Marvel Ultimate or something. What was that thing?
Ultimate.
The Ultimates,
Yeah.
where they went back and they did recast because it is reflective now that our society is different. It's no longer illegal to be gay. You can now marry white and black people, and it's legal, whereas before it wasn't legal when they were writing these things. So a lot of things have changed. So I do think sometimes you do need to look at the origins of a certain character, and if their origins are, like for instance, Captain America. Captain America was around in the 1940s, and to be perfectly honest, if you were trying to say that there was a black or Asian or Latino that was the inspiration for America during that time period to go to war and fight against Nazis, it has to be a white guy. So I would always argue that someone like Captain America would have to be, but that's his personal origin story. So unless they go back in the comics and change the origin story, I kind of feel like everything is open to interpretation. So, but I feel like things have to change because now it's a different time period that we live in, and we live in a much multicolored society. So
I think that's a good place to stop. We got to wrap it up. But I want to thank all the panelists. Please give them a round of applause. You'll see their social media handles, their Twitter, Instagram handles on the screen. So please reach out to them via social media. Use the hashtag #WeAreAllHeroes, and check out what we're doing over at Cashmere Agency, cashmereagency.com as well. Thank you, everybody. Give yourselves a round of applause.